Hello, and welcome to today's episode of Academy21's podcast. Today I'm joined by Ray Boxall, who is Head of Senior School at King's Inter High, which is our sister school. At today's topic, we're thinking about leading outstanding online provision. And we've invited Ray along today to share his insights with a wealth of experience and an extensive background in both online education, on-site education, and certainly in the area of special educational needs. I thought Ray would be a perfect guest to ask the following questions to. So welcome, Ray.
Thanks very much for inviting me along, Amy. Really looking forward to having this discussion for the podcast.
Well, let's get into it. Leading outstanding online provision, something that you're very well equipped to do. And we have seen time and time again in the various roles that you've had within the organisation. So my first question for you, Ray, when we're thinking about relationships and engagement with our students, I'm keen to hear from your perspective. What are the essential elements?
So important, isn't it, to start there, as with any school? I think my first reflection is how important it is in an online setting to go really out of your way to build a team ethos and a good learning culture. Obviously, when you have arguably that barrier of the screen, you have to really go to some lengths to really establish that rapport. I've certainly found what can be really good there is making sure that you do things like include games and playfulness. First of all, I think we need to recognize that the students that we're working with have grown up as digital natives. It's certainly the case with my own teenager at home. So they're really, really used to playing online, engaging online. And some of the things that I find really helpful is to set out a little bit of class time for keeping some of those bits and pieces of dialogue and little jokes and things to build a sense of community going. It may sound strange to really stress doing that, because what we find is one of the dangers when it comes to engagement in an online setting isn't that they start playing up, it's more that they go quiet. So we do need to build in some of that time to just keep that lovely atmosphere. So remembering what people are into, remembering if there's a little in joke that you get to pop in the chat or reference on mic in discussion. So a little bit of judicious chit chat and game playing is great to kind of get the class settled and in that mood to engage online, we really find.
I love that, Ray. I love that it's rooted in human connection, that actually it's about establishing that rapport with the young people that we serve and doing that in playful and creative ways such that they feel comfortable and they feel eager and they want to participate, they want to build that connection and crucially, they want to engage in the learning in the classroom. A couple of phrases you used in there. Digital natives. I've never heard that term before, but my goodness, it strikes a chord having two teenagers myself. And you're absolutely right. I think, the world that our children have grown up in and the children who we teach online is very different now to the world that we grew up in, perhaps as professionals and as teachers and leaders of schools. And children and young people, we can't overestimate how competent they are with technology and how comfortable they are trying new digital techniques, ed technology tools, etc., and building that into your lessons, I suppose, but building them into warm-ups and building them into, playful ways of just finding that connection with the young people leads to some really, really good success stories.
Absolutely, it does. What I find is they are so comfortable with interacting in that way that really some of, I think, grown-ups' understandable misgivings about can online be an engaging environment? Can it be a fun one? Can it be an enriching one? Yes, it can. Of course, we've got to balance that with not too much screen time and doing things away from the online classroom. But yeah, they take to it. They take to it. Certainly all my experiences as an educator and as a parent is that, they don't see it as much of a barrier as we do, I think.
Yeah. I'd completely agree. You also mentioned in there, Ray, dialogue and the importance of dialogue, which feeds nicely into my next question. So we know that fostering oracy in our curriculum is essential. We know that whether we're in bricks and mortar schools, whether we're in virtual classrooms, or whether indeed we're in our family homes, actually language-rich environments that children have not only exposure to, but have active participation in can really shape their potential and really shape their outcomes. So my question is, how do you foster oracy and rich dialogue in our online classrooms.
It's so important, isn't it? Because if we don't plan for it really thoroughly, you can be in a situation where there is a bit of a deficit if a lot of the communication is happening through a chat box and through other media too. But I think we can plan for it really, really well. So, a couple of thoughts on this. First of all, we find that in the online teaching environment, it's really important to explicitly help children to learn how to talk, first of all. So, to be modeling some different modes of communication, learning through talk and thinking about the kind of processes there. And then when it comes to different genres of talk and how we do that, specifically learning about talk. So splitting up those three things: to talk, through talk, and about talk. So, having some real planning around that. In terms of practical routines in the classroom, then I know one thing that I do, and I know other colleagues do at King's Inter High, is encourage children to have some take-up time and some thinking time so they build their confidence up to be able to make a good contribution. I know I certainly say to my students when it comes to making a verbal contribution using the mic in class and building their oracy skills, I say have some time, plan it, think it, like it, then say it, and give them some time to do that. So that's something we find can be very practical, which gives them that framework to contribute. The other deficit, and you alluded to this, Amy, didn't you, is it's very important to have a language and vocabulary rich environment. And in the online classroom environment, really important for them to hear vocabulary as well as see those words, because they might not get, if we don't plan that very carefully, they might not get to hear as much of that. So for key vocabulary, as well as displaying it, making sure there's a way of being able to click on it and hear it as well, we find can be huge. So making sure that we've got a really multimedia rich environment to build up their confidence with being able to do that.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. We think of oracy often as just being verbal, but actually the exposure to words and the exposure to phrases and sentences that they perhaps haven't come across before, being able to see that visually, being able to play with those sounds in their mouth, being able to experiment with using those words in sentences. I think, certainly for our teachers at Academy21, it's about consciously planning in opportunities to the teaching sequence that allow children and young people to have that exploration and that experimentation with words without fear of getting it wrong. Everything that you've said echoes that from a King's Inter High perspective. Is that fair?
Absolutely. And I think in our schools, we're really lucky, aren't we? Because when it comes to having a cultural capital rich environment, I know that you guys in the Academy21, obviously, you're teaching, kids in all regions of the country, and they get to mix together with their dialects and their experiences. And at King's Inter High, we've got a lot of international students, so there's an opportunity there. We really are in a language-rich environment if we can tap into all of our students' experiences. It's really quite unique.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think coming out of certainly your secondary education with good communication skills, and as you touched on earlier, the confidence to use those skills in different contexts, whether it's job interviews, college applications, conversing with peers, contributing to discussions in your society, maybe as part of groups or things in your local area. If we can give one gift to children when they leave our provision, my hope would be that it's excellent communication. So thank you for exploring that, Ray. Okay, Ray, moving the discussion on a little bit, I'm thinking about, we use the phrase quality first teaching an awful lot in education in our sector, whether that's, mainstream on-site education, whether it's online education. We talk about high quality teaching all the time. We've taken that a little bit further, inspired online schools, and we talk about quality first inclusive teaching, or QFIT as the abbreviated version. But I'd really like to unpack with you, for the benefit of our listeners, what are the components of QFIT? If you're a leader in an SEND role or a head teacher role, head of subject role, and you're observing lessons, you're going in, you're trying to find out about the quality of teaching, what are the things that you're looking for true quality first inclusive teaching?
Great question. And of course, we've done a lot of work together, haven't we, over the last year or so in our schools on really thinking deeply about how we can systematize that for our students, but also retain the flexibility to make it individual. So tracking back though, looking at the elements of it, we looked at the Education Endowment Foundation documentation around this, and we kind of extracted out 5 top line strategies around this. But I think the things out of that I would really foreground are the things that, for example, in King's Inter High, that we look at as part of our inclusive teaching plan system. So we make sure that we've got rich information about the students. We think really carefully about what we need to do learning accessibility wise with their resources. So obviously online is a great environment, isn't it, for that? So, we can really easily integrate learning accessibility tools if they're learning online via a screen. We think really carefully when it comes to supporting them in the classroom about what they're going to need to be able to manage any learning-based anxiety. So we'll get onto this, I'm sure, but we're able to flex a lot of things, aren't we, in an online environment? So we can really think about how they make their contributions with us, and how, for example, they might have access to group work, their communication preferences. We also think really carefully as well about how we can scaffold and model in an online teaching environment. One of the things that's really lovely in our schools about the classroom software that we use is it really easily facilitates layouts. So with a click of a button, the classroom can just completely transform. It's, if we think of the analog in the physical world, it's like being able to rearrange all the tables and chairs and resources without all the chaos, isn't it? So it's lovely to be able to do that, because you might be able to bring in all of a sudden a suite of resources that provides sentence stems or changes the layout so that the students can see or not see what each other is contributing, so that they're able to get some additional framework from each other. Or if that's preferable from a confidence point of view, we can wall that off a little bit, and they can give the teacher feedback without feeling that it's very exposing. So there's lots there, and we've tried to systematize that out, haven't we? It's been quite the journey.
It has indeed. And I think every time I pop in for lesson drop-ins or just to visit students in the classroom, I see new ways of working and I see new techniques being employed that just bring out the absolute best in the students' progress in session. When you have teachers who are exceptional at adaptive teaching, an online platform really allows them to harness that, because, as you say, they can adapt things incredibly quickly. It doesn't involve physical movement of things or, changing up what's on the screen in front of the students to support with scaffolding. It's very, very quick. And so once we have a good understanding of the technology and the tools that are available, it takes adaptive teaching to a whole new level. And I think I am brave enough to say, Academy21 is an alternative provision. King's Inter High isn't an alternative provision, but is online. And I would say that between us, the thousands upon thousands of students that we have, we come across a whole host of different academic special educational needs. And I have yet to come across a student that we're unable to support and help. There always seems to be something in our toolkit and in our approach, and certainly in our ethos, that allows us to bend and flex the provision, tailor it for what the student needs.
It's one of the best things about what we do, isn't it? That feeling that we very, very rarely have to look at a young person's needs and go, well, that would be a challenge to meet that. Usually there's a way through, all the accessibility things that we can do and the way that we teach. Yeah, I totally agree. One of the best things about our role in our type of school.
Definitely. And the ethos of the art of the possible. So our standpoint is always how, as opposed to can.
Indeed.
Brilliant. Okay, Ray, let's move on to, we're talking about leading outstanding online provision, and inevitably within that we're looking at how we provide stretch and challenge that really pushes learners to reach their potential. So sometimes takes them out of their comfort zone into that stretch zone, and we're really making sure we're facilitating opportunities for them to be stretched and challenged individually, not just the most able, but for all of the children in a group, in a cohort, in a year group. How do we do that? What does that look like online?
Yeah. Now, one of the things which is perhaps a misconception that's useful to address is any idea that what we do in online is in any way less rigorous than our colleagues in bricks and mortar schools. So, for example, We will do a lot when it comes to baseline assessments and diagnostics to get really good, rich data to understand our students' starting points. That's a misconception. They don't just turn up and we don't know anything about them. And we work very carefully with them at the beginning of their time with us so that we've got rich question level data to understand what are we going to work on with them so that we can really plan well behind the scenes. And then one of the really great things about online is having what we call a presenter area. So a part of the classroom interface that the students don't see, but we know behind the scenes we've got set up with our cues for our students. So we know the things that we're going to focus on them so that we can stretch them and we can be aware of what their gaps are when we know what our strategies are. And I think that the final thing around stretch and challenge then is how easily we can curate things for our students in an online environment. We think really carefully about the flow of sending them off to do other things because, in a virtual sense, they could get lost, couldn't they? But we can curate their path quite well. We can say to individual students, right, here's the link for you to go to for your quiz, or here's the resource that might be useful for you. So we can really personalize that pathway. And there's so much we can do in terms of, making it an experience where it's quite immersive for them. And there's a real sense that this is just for me. I've got this particular pathway through it. Again, it's we've got a nice environment for doing that. I think that's great.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ray. To round off our podcast today, I'm really interested to explore with you the idea of flexibility. So I know for many of our students, both at Academy21 and King's Inter High, I mean, we work with thousands, but for many of our students, the flexibility of how they can participate and when they can participate is exactly what they or their schools or their parents are looking for. Flexible approach to academic learning, to schooling. So I guess my question to you is, from your perspective, what benefits does being a member of an online school bring in the way of flexibility, and what does it actually look like?
Yeah, it's such an eye-opener, isn't it? And I know in my role, speaking to parents, prospective parents often, when we talk about the possibilities, it's quite the eye-opener for them in terms of a whole different way of understanding the concept of schooling and education. I know from working with your team, when it comes to thinking about students who are already in an education setting, perhaps that's how they're accessing online with Academy21. They're already in a safe place, so we can think about the flexibility of how and when they're learning and what their curriculum is. So I guess something which may sound obvious when I point it out, but it's certainly worth considering is in an online environment, of course, you're not got any constraints around physical space, have you? So, if you're a large school like Academy21 or King's Inter High, then of course you've got a large number of colleagues and possible sets and much more flexible timetabling options. So you can offer, a nice broad curriculum, or you can certainly make blocks work much more flexibly for students. So that is really an eye-opener, isn't it? That's fantastic. Obviously, in online, we're recording all the lessons so that students can access them at any time, and also for safeguarding reasons. So that means if it's not optimal for them to learn live, then they don't have to. I've had many conversations with parents, often, in my previous role as head of SEND services, I have conversations with the parent and they'll say, look, given their needs, Monday morning is really a huge challenge for them. They might have a meltdown, and we say, okay, we can flex that. They can access that lesson later in the day. They needn't miss out. They needn't have the additional anxiety of feeling that they're behind, because we can do it in a different way. So the how and the when is really flexible. And I guess my other reflection is on the flexibility in terms of how the students are able to learn. There's less of a requirement to direct questions when it comes to helping students make progress. And we don't need to lean on that as a strategy for managing students or as a strategy for making sure they make progress, because there's so many other ways we can collect the information for them. They can answer a question privately in the private question and answer pod. They can answer it publicly. They can give their answer in a poll and see what their classmates think without it being obvious who thinks what, for example. So there are so many ways to collect that information from them that can be really sociable and collaborative, or it can be a little bit more protecting of students' self-esteem or vulnerabilities or sense of themselves, so that we can be nice and developmental without making them go back into their shells. So yeah, it's a whole different way of doing it, isn't it? And that's that can be huge for colleagues joining us too. And they go, oh my goodness, I could do things a completely different way. Very liberating.
Yeah, liberating is exactly the adjective I would use to describe the experience of moving from a physical classroom to an online classroom. And certainly some of the points you touched upon, well, throughout the podcast really, but certainly in the last answer around, and both of us will come across this regularly, but students with learning-based anxieties or school-based anxieties, that an online platform can very easily, very gently, very discreetly encourage them to just develop those building blocks of self-esteem at a pace that suits them, and crucially, as you pointed out, that's not visible to others. So if they're not quite ready to turn their camera on, if they're not quite ready to speak on the microphone, if they're not ready to contribute to a public class chat, but they feel able to have a private chat with their teacher or complete an activity or answer a poll question, for example. There's so many different ways and opportunities to engage them at a pace and a level that suits them. And I think that's the beauty of it. It's really liberating.
Absolutely. It's it's a lovely environment, and it's great to see students who may have previously struggled or not feel like natural learners come on in confidence when they can learn in that different way.
Great. Well, thank you, Ray. That brings us to the end of today's episode. As always, it's always a rich dialogue with you, and I thoroughly enjoy talking about all things special educational needs, all things academic rigor, and all things school leadership. So thank you very much for joining us and taking the time out to record this podcast with me.
Great pleasure, Amy. I hope colleagues will get some useful takeaways from that, and it's always good to share some insights on a podcast. Thanks very much for inviting me along.
Thanks, Ray. Bye-bye.
Thanks for now.
Thanks for listening to the Alternative Provision podcast from Academy21. Academy21 are providers of live, engaging online provision accredited by the Department for Education.